I had a doctor reach out to me. He was just finishing his residency. He's been in this for 7 years, man. And he's like, hey, I'm actually planning my exit right now. Like, I want to learn about midterm rentals to house clinicians. I want to leave this industry in the next couple of years. And I was like, well, why do you want to leave? He's like, I'm already just burnt out just from going to school. So I think that clinicians are just tired and they see that there's other opportunities to make money and they're treated very unfairly, you know?
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of The Report. Today, we are back in the podcast studio here in downtown San Diego. We got some sunshine outside, and I got a very special guest who's in town for a conference that he's going to be hosting. He was just on the Bigger Pockets podcast. He is a midterm rental expert. I got none other than Jesse Vasquez. Jesse, welcome to the show, my man.
Dude, I'm so excited to be here. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, dude, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah.
I'm excited to stop by your conference and check it out on Monday. And I understand you live in Modesto, is that right?
Yeah, Modesto, which is the armpit of California, just so everybody knows.
They say that. I lived in Palmdale. I was working air traffic control up there for like 6 years.
Yeah.
I used to call Palmdale the armpit of California. But it's funny, Modesto, so actually I have some experience up there. I dated a girl, this is years ago. This is probably like 12 years ago. But we went to college together here in Cal State San Marcos in San Diego. But her family is from Modesto. So we dated for like 4 years. So I would go up there every now and then to visit her family. So I'm a little bit familiar with the area. Her dad was actually a police officer.
No way.
Yeah, so he had all the stories.
I probably know who it is too. That's so weird. We won't talk about it on here though.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, that's freaking awesome. Modesto is not really anything fantastic. I mean, it's kind of whatever, but it's where I started. It's my roots, you know? So for me, I've been able to build in that market, which is, if you could do something in your backyard, that's pretty badass, especially in California. It's super expensive. I mean, we were just talking about before the podcast, like I would love to have something in San Diego, but it's so crazy expensive.
It is. I'm pretty bullish on San Diego real estate and just this area in general. But man, so much to dig into. Yeah. For the listeners that aren't familiar with who you are, why don't you just give us a background overview of what you do today and a snapshot of kind of what you own real estate-wise?
Yeah, so my name is Jesse Vasquez. I've been investing in real estate since 2015. I worked in the healthcare industry for 18 years as a business development manager. So it's basically a fancy way of saying sales rep. Anybody that says business development, they're just sales reps. And I worked on the hospitals, in hospitals. So my job was to literally go to these hospitals and connect with, they were called discharge planners. And that one day I actually connected with a discharge planner who had talked to me about travel clinicians. And at that point in my market, there's so many clinicians that are coming in this area, it's underserved. There's too many patients and there's not enough nurses. So I realized that there's a huge supply and demand issue. So I ended up buying my first property in 2015 and housed travel medical professionals. I got a contract. Since then, I own 10 properties all together, and we're doing over $1 million a year just on 10 properties, which is insane because of these contracts that we'll talk about here in a minute, I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's a very unique model. And out of all the different asset classes within real estate, and then you got the short-term rentals and then midterm rentals, I'm not super close with anyone that's doing it. So I'm very excited to dive into all about midterm rentals today. But what kind of properties are you guys ideally looking for when you implement this plan?
Yeah, so here's what I did backwards. I bought a bunch of single family homes instead of buying commercial at first. So I ended up buying these single families. But now I realize that the more doors you have, the more opportunities you have in this space. And as I connected with more companies, they were talking to me like, how many more properties do you have? At that point, I needed to connect, get more properties. So I'm in the stage now where I'm just buying commercial. I'm looking for commercial. We're picking up commercial properties to have more doors, obviously, to do that. So that was something I did backwards. And I would encourage anybody listening right now, if you're getting in the midterm rental space, really think about actually, doing multifamily and single family to be able to house, have both. Not just go all in on one specific
What's the main difference, obviously, outside of the economies of scale, going in to do a single family as a midterm versus maybe a fourplex?
Yeah, so a single family is going to be good for two different things. One is you're going to have families, like I work with insurance companies, so if a family loses their home due to a fire, flood, or some kind of catastrophic event, we'll house them, and typically they're single family homes. So that's a really good market to go after because they pay a lot more. Usually it's 5x. Rich long-term rental rates, if not higher than that sometimes. So you can get almost like crazy rates from doing that. But commercial, when you're dealing with these agencies, they like to work with people that have more properties. So basically I would be a solutions provider for, let's say, ALE solutions. So the more doors that I have, the more they're going to come to me and say, hey, Jess, we have properties. We're going to use you solely or use, you and 5 other companies that have a big portfolio. So the larger your portfolio, the bigger the mix, the more it's diversified, the more opportunity you have when you're connecting with these agencies and stuff. So
for someone new that wanted to get into midterm rentals, what's the first couple steps that they should look into?
Yeah, the first step I would say is to really understand your market I like travel clinicians and I like working with the agencies. So a simple step that anybody could do right now is literally go on indeed.com, which is where you find jobs, right? So say I'm looking in San Diego, I'd go to indeed.com and I would actually look at what the demand is. We'll see who's hiring. And one of the cool things about that is it'll actually show us the agency that's hiring, the phone number, and even the recruiter that's attached to them. So I can now call a recruiter up. Like those are free leads right there. We just pick up the phone. You got a cold call. But that's the first thing that I'll do is see what the actual demand is in that market. Second thing I would do is try to find properties that are near hospitals, like 20 minutes from hospitals. That's another good indication. But one thing that I also talk about too, Rich, is don't ever put your eggs in like the healthcare basket because there could be, hiring freezes or things like that. So you want to look at single family homes. You want to look at, properties that are essentially not super expensive. Like say here, you have $1 million home. Your mortgage is going to be what, like 6K on that? I would assume.
In terms of what? Operating as what?
As just like say, you just purchased a home here for $1 million,
Okay.
you're probably looking at what, 6K a month?
Owing just like a long-term rent?
Just a long-term rent.
Sure, yeah.
Perfect. So like with an insurance company, you could get 12 to 15,000 for that one property. And on the healthcare side, you could potentially do about 9 to 10,000 on one single unit. But again, it has to you got to be near hospitals. You got to connect with these agencies and you got to build, rapport and relationships with these companies. And we can dive into that here in a minute, but
is there a way to do midterm rentals just through Airbnb or Vrbo apps as well?
yeah, but the problem with that, and this is probably something you've dealt with, the saturation on that, as more cities become regulated, like here in San Diego, there's regulations that are happening. People are used to making that income from Airbnb. Now, the next closest thing would be a midterm rental. So now you're going to have hundreds of, if not thousands of people going after the midterm rental model, 30 days or more, right? So that competition is going to get extremely heavy. So what I talk about is going after the businesses where only like less than 1% of people are actually going to learn how to connect with these businesses and build a relationship. Not only are they going to get higher price points, but they're also going to not deal with the competition that the average person is dealing with. So it's like you're laddering up against all the other competitors. So I would take a saturated market any day as long as I was going after those agencies and building on that back end.
How come the agencies don't just go through Airbnb and Vrbo if it's cheaper?
Yeah, they do that. And it's not necessarily cheaper. They'll go look for properties on there. They'll find and that's how I found out about this is I actually ended up getting a booking from Airbnb from an insurance company. And at that time, this was 2016, Rich. So I was super stoked. It was like a $6,000 booking on this property that I had. It was 3 months long. And I'm like, shit, this is freaking amazing. I just got like essentially an $18,000 booking like this. And the thing that I didn't do, and this is what I would encourage everybody now, that when you get a booking like that, talk to that agent, talk to that relocation specialist, find out their name, find out their phone number. In fact, I would, and this is what I did, I asked that relocation specialist if I could send them Starbucks. We have this beautiful thing called DoorDash, right? We can DoorDash anything, anywhere. So I asked, hey, who are you sitting next to? Do you mind telling me their name, first and last? And I'll send you guys Starbucks if you give me 5 minutes to just talk to you about what properties I have that are in the market. That one phone call, that one Zoom call that I had with them, I got, like I said, everybody's name and number. I then went on LinkedIn, connected with them on LinkedIn. That's how I started building my business, was just outreach, sending them stuff. They didn't expect anything to come to them, which it gave them, Starbucks and croissants and stuff like that. So they were not expecting that. So I was obviously remembered. And that's one thing that I really would encourage everybody to do now is really think outside the box, especially with the way real estate is right now.
With the landlord-tenant laws and all the bureaucracy, especially here in California, being a blue state, how do you navigate around the tenant laws in terms of like avoiding squatters and that sort of thing?
Dude, I love this question. So I'm going to give you a quick backstory real quick. When I was a kid, I watched my parents get their properties taken away because, not necessarily taken away, but they lost properties because of squatters. I came from a very Catholic household. I'm Hispanic, and everybody out there that's Hispanic knows that that's typically what the culture is. So they had 8 properties, and eventually over the next probably 10 years, as a 10-year-old kid, they lost a lot of those properties, or they sold them due to people like taking advantage of them. So somehow subconsciously in my mind, I was like, I want to get paid up front. And the cool thing about doing what I do is actually the agencies are the lessees. So I'm renting my property to this multi-million-dollar agency. I've never had anybody not pay.
Got it.
So for me, that's like, I could sleep better at night knowing that whatever happened to my parents is not going to happen to me, and I'm going to get paid up front. And a lot of times they'll do 3 months up front. So I'm getting a $30,000 check up front, $18,000, $24,000 check up front, which is amazing.
And these agencies, they'll subsidize, is it like a per diem type of thing to where they'll subsidize a portion of the rent? Is that accurate?
Yeah, so they'll do, it really just depends on the contract. So if we're talking about the clinical side of things, so say we're working with the healthcare agency, they will look at it and say, we'll pay you, if market rent is, I'm going to give you this an example, $2,000, we'll pay you 2.5x whatever long-term rental rates are. So we have to negotiate. There's a negotiation. There's an art to negotiation. We connect and we talk about being professional providers, having safe accommodation with housing. And this was a game changer for me. I actually had vehicles, Rich, that I added to my property. So if a nurse flew into San Francisco, they got her Uber to my property. Sitting on the counter would be keys, and in the garage would be a car. So not only am I helping the recruiter by finding housing for them, and then we also have a vehicle, which is the nurse doesn't have to get their own car. Like, we provide the vehicle. So we're getting, our expectations are way above everybody else's. So we're setting the bar way up there. So and that's what you have to do. And you know, this being in the boutique space, you got to do things a little bit different. And I think that being able to have hospitality, which at the end of everything that we're doing, this business is about hospitality. So is midterm rental. So is connecting with businesses. And the more hospitality you have, the better you're going to, potentially be in the long term.
Sure. So with the car, who's providing the car? Is that something you guys rent on Turo, or how do you guys provide that?
So I bought a fleet of vehicles. So we have all these cars, and we actually ended up getting an umbrella policy. In California, it's a nightmare to rent cars to people, which Turo is a good thing. But I ended up putting together with lawyers and attorneys and drafting these umbrella policies so anybody that drives a car is still insured. But Turo would be a good way for the average person to get in because they automatically take the fees and you're covered. But for me, we did it kind of a different, more on the business side of things. But it was a game changer when I started talking to these recruiters and these companies saying, this is how we do things. This is the operations that come along with it are, we're saving the company money. And at the end of the day, that's what you need to do. You need to save money for these companies. And if they see that, they'll look at you as more of an asset than, a liability of whatnot.
So one of the most important pieces of setting up a short-term rental is, and it can cost a lot of capital, especially if you're going to do a good design, is the furnishings. You can easily put $60,000 into a 4-bedroom home and still have a lot left over to do more if you wanted to.
Right.
So how are you guys furnishing these midterm rentals? Are you guys designing them out to a T so they're luxury, or are you just kind of doing the bare bones basics? Learning to become a successful real estate investor can take a lot of time and dedication, which some people just don't have. If you're one of these individuals, this doesn't mean you can't invest in real estate. My company, Summers Capital, is buying a bunch of boutique hotels right now, and you can invest with us in these deals without having to do any of the work. Our team sources the deals, we secure the lending, we take care of all the renovations, and we even handle all the day-to-day operations with our in-house management company, making it truly hands-off and passive for our investors. If you want to learn more to see if we can help you, go to summerscapital.com/invest to book a call with our team. Again, that's summerscapital.com/invest. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I don't bare bones basics anything. I think that right now it's way too competitive. So we outfit ours like short-term rentals, but we add a little bit more of comfort to them. These people are living in these properties where you see a lot of beautiful Airbnbs and they're stale. Like they look like magazine covers. Like people don't necessarily want that in the midterm space. They want to be able to walk in, feel comfortable, have a comfy couch. So we're still going all out, like a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. We're spending $30K to do it. But these properties, again, they're situated different. As more and more operators on the Airbnb side get into the midterm side, they're bringing that sexiness that Airbnbs have. You know about that.
Mm.
So as a midterm rental operator, you need to make sure that you have, just like you have in the studio, which is gorgeous, by the way. You got to have something that has accents that provides, comfort, but also is not just like a basic corporate type rental. So I think that's where, operators in this space now need to really think about who's going to be coming into this space and making sure that you're staying on par. And right now, Rich, most of the properties on, like, say, Furnish Finder, they look like grandma's house, man. They're not like designed well.
Mm-hmm.
They look like shit. They're not put together the right way. So right now is a really, really good opportunity for people to have a really designed place, nice designed place, and then be able to capitalize on that.
Will you also market these properties on Airbnb in case you get some bookings here and there that are willing to pay up for it?
Yeah, totally. We get bookings from Airbnb still too, and VRBO. The cool thing about VRBO and Airbnb is that you'll get these agencies that reach out. So you might have a relocation specialist that's reaching out because a family that lost a property. And then that's where I got that lead. I'll get the lead from there and then capitalize on that lead like we talked about a minute ago. So the biggest part of this is getting those leads and then being able to nurture their leads. And then eventually they turn into to sales, or they transition into, being able to connect and get a booking. So Airbnb is huge.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many people looking on that platform, right? So you're able to grab leads, generate leads from there.
You mentioned now you're going after commercial deals. What type of property are you ideally looking for?
Yeah. 20 unit plus. Yeah. 20
multifamily?
Yeah. Multifamily. Yeah. 20 units. So we're looking at basically creating like a communal space. So kind of like your boutique hotels, essentially. It's same kind of concept, but they would be geared towards travel medical professionals. And we would have like a communal area, somewhere that the nurses that don't know each other can kind of hang out and talk to each other. They would still have their own rooms and all that kind of thing. But we want to be able to brand those all over the US and partner with Furnish Finder or other companies so that these agencies can now, find, safe accommodations for their clinicians all over the US. And we'll have, again, our brand will be across everything. So I think there's a lot of opportunities right now in the space to build specific type of properties for a specific clientele, especially if you get contracts. Because say, what's a big hospital here in San Diego?
Scripts.
Scripps. So say Scripps goes to you and says, "Hey, Rich, your boutique hotel is awesome. We want to rent out 20 rooms for a year. We're willing to pay you $300,000 for that. And these clinicians would be at your property, whether they're, we're going to pay you that no matter what." So, you get these C-suite executives that you can connect with, and then eventually that's what they do. These companies have been doing this for a long time. There's a lot of opportunity for people to build on that. So again, it's just what's the need in the market? How often is people coming down? What do you have available? And is your property unique enough and close enough to a hospital or some sort that they're going to be able to work with you on that end?
I'm curious, what does lending look like with these multifamily deals? Not just on the acquisition, but then let's say you prove out this model, you increase the NOI and quote unquote, you force your appreciation. How does an appraiser look at that on the back end in terms of a refi?
Yeah. So if we have contracts in place, they're looking at the contracted amount, dollar amount, because that's already guaranteed to come in. I haven't done a multifamily deal like that yet. So I've only done these on single family. So I can't give you an answer on the other part, but the lenders that we have talked to already, if we have a contract in place that says they're going to pay X amount of, dollars per property, they'll use that as the income. So, but it has to be on paper, written, signed, sealed, and delivered before they will actually exercise on it. So
it almost seems like, I'm just trying to work backwards. It almost seems like it might be best to buy the property using the existing rents and the actual income of the property. You might be able to get better terms. And then let's say you got a 10-year note. Well, you got 10 years to, do your business plan. And then I'm sure you got refinancing opportunities, but that might be cheaper debt. I'm just trying to think from a lender's perspective. They might see the long-term rents as lower risk.
Yep.
And more proven. So you might be able to get better leverage and potentially better pricing, but then you'd have this runway to operate. And I don't think they're going to ask any questions as long as you're paying your debt service on time.
That's exactly right. So not only that, but if we pick that up with long-term rents, then we can flip that NOI, right? We can go back to them later on and say that. But a couple companies that I've talked to already have been very open about doing this. And I think, you know how it is with lending, you got to talk to so many different people, but this is such a newer concept to them. They don't necessarily understand it. But you and I talked about this before offline. Blackstone just picked up, $30.4 billion. They're actually rich spending that money to pick up and do these exact same things. In fact, Airbnb over the last 2 years, 28% of their income has come from 30 days or more. So when you start seeing smart money make moves like this, the general public has 3 to 5 years before we actually catch up to smart money. So, and go in and everybody right now watching this or listening to this, go check that out. Go read up on it. So Blackstone's putting their money in that specific space.
Do you know what kind of assets they're targeting for this midterm stuff?
Yeah, multifamily.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Airbnb over, I think 6 months ago said they're allowing like these bigger REITs to now short-term rent where you can go rent their unit, short-term rent. So what they're actually doing is midterm rentals in those markets. So you can rent, say, something from Blackstone, a unit that's, $2,000 a month. They'll take a percentage from it, but you can only do 30 days at a time. So Airbnb is doing this. So now Blackstone, all these bigger companies are like, there's a huge opportunity here for us. Let's take advantage of it. And they're getting into hospitality too. So eventually you're probably gonna have some boutique operators, competing with you, Blackstone.
Yeah. There's a friend that I have, he comes to our local real estate meetups, and he actually invested in one of my first multifamily deals, which was a 32-unit building up in Indianapolis. But this gentleman, super cool story. He's been on the Bigger Pockets podcast as well. He was a middle school PE teacher who basically cashed out his 401k and started investing in multifamily, and has since left his day job, and he owns a few hundred units. But anyways, he is actually selling a deal. I think it's a 57-unit deal in Mentor, Ohio, which is like a suburb of Cleveland. And I believe the buyer is planning to operate all 57 units as midterm rentals. And so I thought that was pretty unique.
Yeah, I think that's unique. And I also think that, and you and I talked again about this offline, that right now is, the next couple of years are going to be not necessarily weird in the real estate space, but people are going to have to get way more creative with deals. Like you can't just buy a property in the MLS today and expect to cash flow from it. I've ran hundreds of deals. It's super freaking hard, even in the Midwest where stuff is super cheap. So I think that this is the next wave of real estate coming, is these kind of creative deals that are going to happen, connecting with companies. In fact, when I was on Bigger Pockets, David Green said, real estate's been the same for the last 150 years. It's been way too easy. So now people got to get creative. They're gonna look at these types of things that you're doing, that I'm doing, and start adjusting. And Blackstone's doing that. So if that's not validity that you're on the right track, then I don't know what is, because that's $30.4 billion.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, what does the lending look like for single family? If someone would just wanted to go pick up a single family property and operate it as a midterm, what kind of lending options do they have?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of lending options right now when it comes to midterm stuff. They could pick it up as a commercial unit. There's a company called Host Financial that is now, have you heard of Host Financial?
I have.
Daniel. So they do stuff like that too, where they're lending to midterm rental operators. They're looking at potential income from those. So I think more and more banks are going to adapt to this. Short-term rentals, they're barely starting to catch up to that. There's not a bunch of lenders that are doing that. So the conventional loans, when it comes to that, they're willing to do it. I think they just get nervous about, the vacancy. And that's how we make our money in this space. And that is that we take the most people that are long-term renting properties, they're looking at, they're getting that year lease. But us in the short-term or even midterm side, we're taking that risk is why we make inflated income, right? That's the whole point of it. But I think banks still haven't adapted to that whole, vacancy model yet.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's similar to the short-term side, because on the short-term side, there are lenders out there, DSCR lenders, that will lend based on the projected short-term rental revenue. They'll use AirDNA data. However, the pricing is rather expensive, and you'll have to pay a couple points up front, but you can still get the deal done. And then there's long-term options as well, to where they'll size it up via DSCR based on the long-term rent projections in that market. They'll actually use long-term rent comps. But the cool thing is you as the investor, the buyer or borrower, is you can go and hand select the right comps that you want to use in terms of rent comps, and then you can kind of show that to the lender, and hopefully they use them, hopefully they don't. I've never seen a deal like that actually didn't qualify based on the long-term rents.
Yeah.
These lenders want to get paid too, right? And so
Of course they do.
Everyone's trying to get paid, and the appraisers typically aren't trying to ruin the deal. But yeah, it's interesting. It sounds like the options are very similar to the short-term rental game.
Yeah, very similar. But not only to this too, Rich, is that there's not enough data. As midterm rentals have been around for a while, but now they're starting to get steam. There's not really data that shows, like AirDNA, we can't go on AirDNA and know that what we're going to get on a midterm rental. We can't go on Mashvisor and see that either. So it's really difficult right now for people to find out the actual income they're going to make. And Furnish Finder is actually coming out with some new software that can allow us to see what midterm rental operators are making in their markets. Because most of them are done, if they're not booking online on Airbnb, they're being booked like what I'm doing, for the direct party that's going after them. So there's no real way to gauge that income unless you have your own properties and you can show that to a bank. Since we're so early in this space right now, I feel like, Airbnb's in the sixth or seventh inning, if we're going to baseball terms. Like, it's been around for a while. They're pushing new experiences. But if you look at midterm rentals, like, the umpires are just getting on the field. Like, they're just chalking the field, right? That's how early we are in this game. So there's still so much opportunity. And imagine investing in Airbnb in 2007 when they first started. I feel like with the midterm rental space, maybe it might not get as big as Airbnb, but even if it's half that size, which I'm pretty sure it will be, to be able to invest in that now and have that long roadway to build something really credible. And, this is the other thing too, Rich, is that I'm creating this business where I have a Rolodex of companies that I work with, and then I have the tangible real estate. The cool thing about what I'm doing is I could sell my real estate and say Blackstone buys that, which that's my end game. At some point, some kind of hedge fund or smart money institution buys my book of business. But then I'm also able to sell my business that I have, which is my connection with these companies, these agencies. That's a multi-million-dollar company in itself. So everybody listening to this or watching this right now, when you're doing the midterm rental space and you go after agencies, there's two sides of businesses you're able to put together. It's the real estate side, and then also the connections with these agencies or relationships. So that can be sold too.
What's the value of the agencies and having that book of business?
Yeah. So that value is that you're going to stay occupied all the time. They're going to come to me, or they're going to go to you, say, that's you, Rich, doing this. I'd reach out to you and say, hey, Rich, what do you have available in San Diego? I have a family that has a pet, and it's a family of 5. What do you have in Mission Beach? They lost their home right around the corner from there. So then they're going to always be reaching out to you. You're the go-to person. You're the solutions provider for that market. And that's why those relationships are key, that you continue to nurture those, because they'll just keep sending you referrals. They're not going to go look on Airbnb. They're not going to go look on VRBO. They're going to stick with the Rolodex they have.
Are there any midterm rental platforms or software out there? I know you got Furnish Finder rather.
Yeah.
I used that a little bit right when the pandemic dropped in early 2020. I looked at it for some of the short-term rental stuff out here, but I'm curious, is there any software out there that specializes in connecting these, employers that need the housing for their employees with people and operators like you?
Yeah. So Furnish Finder is one of those, but what Furnish Finder is it's just essentially what you just said right now. They're connecting a landlord to whoever the potential renter is. There's another company called chbo.com. It's corporate housing by owner. You do got to pay to get that, but that's where a lot of the corporate companies will go look for housing. There's another company called Landing. I don't know if you ever heard of Landing at all. They're just starting to get big right now. They're getting bigger, and they do 30 days at a time. Same kind of model where they actually take a percentage.
I think Pace Morby was telling me about this last week in Scottsdale.
He probably was. They're just starting to get connected to like influencers and things like that. That company in the next couple of years is going to be big. I think you're talking about Pad Split.
Pad Split. That's what it's called. Yeah.
That's another one too. So So right now, again, as we were talking about before, right now is such an opportunity. Rich, let's just create a platform right now to connect everybody. That'll be our $1 million, our multi-million-dollar business right there.
On the podcast.
On the podcast.
Yeah, I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like just thinking big picture on a macro level, you got my wheels turning a little bit. So with the midterm stuff and then you get the short-term stuff, are a lot of these midterm investors, are they coming from the short-term side and are they converting their short-term rentals into midterm rentals, or like where are these midterm rentals coming from? Because it's taken from something, right? You only have so much housing supply out there. There's only so many investors out there. So all these new midterm rental investors and midterm properties, where are they being sourced from? Hey guys, real quick, I hope that you're finding value in this show. If you could do me a huge favor and drop a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or whichever platform you're listening on, it would mean the world to me. Also, if you know of anyone that would potentially benefit from this podcast, feel free to share it with them so we can help more people build wealth through real estate investing. Now back to the show.
There's a pie that's split right here. I get a lot of short-term rental operators that are just like, I'm done with this. I don't like dealing with the turnover. I don't like the headaches. Regulations are hitting us hard. So that's a big chunk.
Sure.
And then also a bunch of traditional landlords that have had property for years that are just like, I don't want to deal with the eviction process. I don't want to do, because they've gone through those things. So they look at midterm rentals as like, I only need 4 guests a year. I'm going to go after clinicians. I'm going to go after relocations for families and things like that. So I think there's a really good mix, but I also really feel it's dependent on the city too. As more and more cities are regulated, and right now, I was actually talking to Brian Payne, the CEO of Furnish Finder, about this, and they have some data. 3% of the U.S. is regulated by short-term rentals, right? Only 3%, and that's expected to grow. So if we think about that over the next several years, let's say that gets to 10 to 12%, this market's going to continue to grow. So again, it's just so early in this space. There's so much opportunity.
Can you say that figure again? The stat you said, only 3% of what?
3% of the U.S. is regulated by short-term, like the short-term rental regulations. So the cities have municipalities that are saying, you can't short-term rent anymore. So 3% of cities.
And that number is for sure going to go up.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the cool thing about what you're doing is even if that does happen, it doesn't matter because you're operating as a hotel. So you're skirting all those issues, and kind of what we're doing in a way, we're getting away from those. But I think too in the future that, midterm rentals might be looked at just the same way Airbnbs are. But if you create a company, how is anybody ever going to know? Because they're going after you directly. We have like corporate contracts. So essentially, we have corporate contracts that are keeping us in business, even if regulations do come around, which is why I stress, relationships being important. But who knows when that's going to happen? I don't know if that's something. It's always important to have an exit strategy from day one, like no matter what you're doing, right?
Yeah. And, I was just thinking like big picture from a macro level, it's like, okay, well, with all these short-term rental investors and then all these midterm rental investors, it's taking away from the long-term rental supply, but it's also taken away from the supply of primary residence for families to live in, which is going to continue to push pricing further up.
Right.
I'm just trying to think how that's going to play out, like just mid to long-term, perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, it's curious. I mean, there's not enough housing that's been built. I just looked at a statistic the other day, and it was like 2010 to 2020 was the least amount of houses that were built in the last in 75 years. And it was staggering, the numbers. I wish I had it off the top of my head. And there's just not enough properties being built. There's just not. We have a housing shortage. So I don't know. We got to build more.
Yeah. And the demographics on the demand side look good. So that's why I'm bullish on the fundamentals. It's just right now, I think the Fed has all the control with the interest rates. So we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah.
It looks like we'll probably have maybe another small raise, maybe 25 basis points or two. And then things maybe will start to normalize. Maybe they'll settle around 5.5. I don't know.
Yeah. Hopefully.
But we'll see.
Wishful thinking right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's your vision, like big picture with these midterm rentals? And do you think you'll ever pivot over and start investing in other asset classes?
I think right now I'm the type of person that if something's not broken, just stick with it. I've been a big short-term rental operator for a while too. I buy unique properties. So like tree houses, things like that, I'll still operate on that end. But for the midterm rental side, like I talked to you about a minute ago, I want to start creating, getting these large contracts and then housing, these clinicians and being able to create those all over the US and having like a, like being a go-to, almost like an extended stay. They're the
Hmm.
biggest company that has the most people that, have corporate contracts. So essentially having an extended stay style, hotel, motel, even though it's not technically that, it could be multi-unit, where these folks would just go and stay and operate, stay in the properties for X amount of time and have these corporations paying for it. And then obviously, taking off. And there's a lot of companies right now that are doing that. That's why I was reading what we were talking about earlier with Blackstone. So they've done a lot of research showing that the post-pandemic travel is different, right? There's people that are still working remotely. They're making their moves based off of that. So I still feel that the pandemic really shifted the way people are living, the way they're lodging, the way they're doing everything. So I still feel that's going to be a really big part going in the future. So, I think niching down, like I mentioned a while ago, anybody that does that and you're able to be really good at it, you're going to have a success, tremendous success. So just like you, man, with the boutique hotel stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's similar in that regard
Yeah.
for sure. I'm curious, is there any demand for this product internationally?
I've had so many people reach out. So I just talked to somebody in Canada, and there's a huge need in Canada. But Furnish Finder, they're starting to actually reach out to other parts of the world and find out more information. In fact, they just hired, and you guys are hearing this first on here. I know they're going to talk about it in the next couple of days, but they just hired a bunch of data scientists from all over the US or all over the world to be able to pull data so that they can see what the demands are looking like. Because this is not just a problem here. We saw during the pandemic how bad our infrastructure is on the clinical side, right? There's just not enough clinicians. We saw New York, we saw LA, we saw San Diego even.
Mhm.
There's just not enough clinicians to meet the demand if we're talking about that. So I think there's still a lot of opportunity for us to operate in these spaces. And, there's a lot of nurses that are wanting to leave this industry. In fact, I just read Forbes put an article together. By 2027, 2 out of 4 clinicians are expected to leave healthcare altogether. So if we already have an issue now, imagine in, the next 4 or 5 years when all those people jam out and now we're like stuck with no clinicians. They're going to want more travelers to go into this space. So the trajectory is just continuing to go up. I think we're in a good space right now.
And why is that with the clinicians?
Burnout. Clinicians were treated like crap, man, over the last couple of years. They were forced to get COVID vaccines when they don't necessarily want them, or they would lose their jobs, working 15, 20 hours a day even. And a lot of times these clinicians, and I talk to them, I get messages from people every day almost that are like, hey, I just recently you're going to love this. I had a doctor reach out to me. He was just finishing his residency. He's been in this for 7 years, man. And he's like, hey, I'm actually planning my exit right now. Like, I want to learn about midterm rentals to house clinicians. I want to leave this industry in the next couple of years. And I was like, well, why do you want to leave? He's like, I'm already just burnt out just from going to school. So I think that clinicians are just tired and they see that there's other opportunities to make money and they're treated very unfairly,
Is that what you were doing when you were in the medical field?
No, I was working on the business development side.
Okay.
So I worked with clinicians on a regular basis. So I saw like the daily grind. I saw patients. I worked in hospice where it's like patients have end of life. So I was working on that end where I saw a lot of that stuff happening. These nurses are just tired. They're just tired.
Mhm.
They're treated very unfairly.
Yeah. So you host a podcast with your guy Rafa, the Big Break Show,
Mhm.
which I was recently a guest on a couple months ago. How come you never thought about investing or maybe implementing this model with Rafa in some hotel stuff?
Yeah, we actually are. We're talking about that. Tomorrow we have a mastermind thing that we're going to talk about, and he's got some really cool boutique investors that he's working with, and that's a model they're looking at now too. So we essentially will have probably some deals happening here in the future. It's just acquiring the right properties in the right markets, and we got to do a lot of research on it too. So just because the healthcare industry is good, we got to look at all the other sectors, job growth, all the same things that you would typically look at from buying a single family home. So there's a lot of due diligence that goes along with investing in the right spot when it comes to this. So right now we're almost trying to re-engineer it too. We're looking at where are they building new hospitals, where's new infrastructure happening, so that we can capture those potential clients and know that we're going to have a long roadway of business to build.
Yeah, I love that. Well, maybe I'll see you over there at the mastermind tomorrow.
Yeah.
I was planning on stopping by, and then definitely planning on stopping by Monday. What kind of things are going to be covered at your event Monday?
Yeah, so the Midterm Rental Summit, we're going to cover everything investing in the midterm rental space, from design, how to acquire properties, the tax and legality purposes of it. I'm going to be talking about how to go after the business-to-business model. Brian Payne from the Furnish Finder CEO is going to be talking about all the new data that they got. So this data is going to be like nobody's ever seen it before. So I'm really stoked about that, man. And then my buddy Rafa is going to be talking about acquiring through arbitrage, which is something that you could pick up a property and do this model and be able to make money from it without actually owning the property. So we're pretty much checking every mark, when it comes to that space. So I'm pretty stoked about it, man. I'm excited about it. And we're sold out too, which is for my first event. So
Yeah, where's the venue?
Mission Bay Resort.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't think I've been there, but excited to check it out.
yeah. You should, man. Definitely come by.
Well, dude, I appreciate you coming on, man. I love everything you're doing. I'm a big fan of everything, and I'm just inspired by this model. It's definitely unique, and it's definitely like paving the path for others behind you. So appreciate everything you're doing and all the content that you're putting out there, and excited to see you maybe on Saturday.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. I look forward, and thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate it, man.
Listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.